I'm going to talk a little bit about the chief financial officer or chief flight officer role in navigating healthcare systems forward. And specifically what I want to try to do is create the analogy between what I've learned in aviation and what I do every day managing the finances of a pretty large healthcare organization, now $14 billion a year. So by way of background, and I got to run through this real quick to make my point, BBA and MBA from University of Michigan. For those of you from other Big Ten schools and otherwise, take note. 30 years in healthcare, 13 as a CFO and COO, and 25 years in large healthcare systems. In addition to that, I'm 15 years as a pilot. I have a commercial and flight instructors rating. I'm the chief flight instructor for a flight school in New Hudson, Michigan, and I own 4 single-engine airplanes. So you might think that I have a little bit of passion around aviation as well. So what's the point of all that? Well, the first point is I'm old. Okay, that's the first thing you need to take away from that. For all the youngsters in the room, I'm the old guy. And the second, according to my kids anyway, I have a little bit of street cred. I have a little street credibility because I've been doing both for an awfully long time. So what I hope to do today is share experiences that I have as a pilot with how I take those concepts and operating models into my work every day as CFO of the CHE Trinity Healthcare System. And the 5 principles I want to share today, because there's so many, I really struggle with, how do I boil this thing down? And there are really 5 principles I want to share today. What make things fly? Pretty basic, right? The second is, what are the critical elements that you have to manage? The third is planning, and planning, and planning. And the fourth is contingency. Be prepared for contingencies and how you manage those. And finally, the fifth is executing a safe and smooth landing. Because in aviation, it's all about the landings. That's what you get judged on. So with that, let me jump forward here. And here I am. This is one of my airplanes. Piper Arrow, up in the air, rocking and rolling. I never get tired of watching a plane fly. I don't know about you guys, but isn't it just fascinating that an object can fly like that? A helicopter or an airplane just get up in the air and fly? I'm always fascinated by it, never get bored by it either, by the way. So what makes a plane fly? So when I teach flight instruction, we talk about the 4 elements, 4 forces on an airplane. We have thrust, we have lift, we have drag, and we have weight. I don't know if you knew that or not, but those are the 4 forces that act on an airplane. For the plane to actually leave the runway, to take off, thrust and lift have to exceed drag and weight. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? In order to get airborne, thrust and lift have to exceed drag and weight. So that's principle number 1. How do you apply those concepts to your organization? What creates lift and thrust in your organization? You need to know the answer to that. So at CHE Trinity Health, for example, we look at executive dashboards all the time. And we're always looking at, our lineup. We're in 21 states, 89 hospitals, 80 long-term care facilities, 2.75 million home health visits a year. We have a Medicare Advantage program in Columbus. We have a lot going on across states, across different service lines, and so forth. And we line them all up because we want to know where is lift created and what is creating drag. So where's lift and where's drag? And what we know is the composite of all this, and by the way, this information has been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty. So this is by way of example, but this is what you can do in your own facilities as well. But we know that in aggregate, that the lift has to exceed the drag, and in order to hit our operating margin goals, in composite, these things have to add up. And if they don't, then we have to look at how do we create more lift or how do we reduce drag? How are we going to do that? And we spend a lot of time talking about that. Then in addition, in each of our facilities, we also look at kind of our service line approach as well. And Dan talked a little bit about this in terms of decision support and cost accounting. and that is what service lines are creating lift or thrust, and what service lines are creating drag. And again, here we use bubble charts because they're really very telling relative to kind of the size of the service line and what their relative position is in terms of are they producing operating income or aren't they producing operating income. And again, when we're looking at how do we create more thrust, more lift, less drag, less weight, we're looking inside the information of this decision support and our cost accounting and saying, how can we change the position of some of these service lines in order to create more lift and more thrust? And sometimes the answer might be, you can't do it. So we talked about principle 1, but principle 2, same takeoff, is managing our instruments. So a lot of things are going on when we're taking off in the airplane. We have power, we have speed, we have heading. We have a whole number of different variables that we're managing. When you fly, it's all about managing your instruments. And it's all about managing critical values relative to expected values. So for example, speed. We have a whole number of speeds that we have to manage. We have VR, rotation speed, VX, which is our best angle of climb speed. We have VY, our best rate of climb speed, VA, maneuvering speed, VNO, the normal operating speed, and VNE, the never exceed speed. We have to manage all of those because anytime that we aren't managing within those expectations, bad things can happen. So we absolutely need to manage those, and every plane has different V speeds. So whatever plane you're flying, you need to know what those V speeds are, and you need to manage those. So likewise, in our operating model in the healthcare system, we need to know what our critical elements are as well. So I like to think about our operating margin at 0, and then our contribution margin per unit of service, and understanding, kind of if I think about that as my runway, and then my liftoff, my takeoff, what are the critical data elements that take me from break even into positive operating territory, and then to whatever my targeted operating margin is, whether it's 1%, 2%, or 3%. So in a fee-for-service environment, those volume units may be one thing. In a bundled payment environment, they may be something else. In a capitated model, they may be something else yet. So in each one of our facilities and each one of our service lines, we understand what our critical data elements are and how we're managing to those expected points. And if we're not achieving our expected points, we're looking at what are the financial interventions that need to take place in order to course correct. So inside the cockpit, as I talked about on takeoff, we have a whole number of instruments that we're managing. We have our airspeed, we have our attitude. Now some would say it has to do with how I feel every morning, but we won't go there. We have our altimeter, what's our altitude? We have our heading, what's our heading? We have our vertical speed, what's our trend in terms of lift and so forth. We have our power instruments. We have a whole number of things that are going on inside that cockpit when we're flying. And we have expected values for each one of those instruments. And we check and cross-check those instruments all the time to make sure that they're telling us the same thing. So likewise, every day I manage the healthcare organization the same way. I have executive dashboards. And I'm looking at those dashboards and I'm looking for what are they telling me? And are they telling me that I'm at expected value or am I not at expected value? And if I'm not at expected value, then I know I have to make judgments about correction, intervention. So I look at daily measures, I look at monthly measures and trends, I look at our service line profitability reports, I look at not just volume, but I look at costs, FTEs, and so forth, and I use all of these elements every day to understand, as the chief flight officer of the organization, do I think the organization is on the right course or not? And if they aren't, I call the chief operating officer up, I call up my lieutenants, and we go to work and figure out what do we need to do in order to make adjustments. So principle number 2 really relates to knowing your instruments, knowing your critical values, knowing what the expectations are around those, and managing those. So that's principle number 2. So now we've taken off, we're up in the air, we're flying along, but we have to go somewhere. You know, we always have a mission. Pilots always have a mission. Sometimes it's the $100 hamburger or the $200 omelet, whatever it might be Saturday morning, wherever we can fly to. But, you know, we always have a mission to where we want to go. So, for example, this is a look at what a flight plan looks like to go from the airport that I fly out of in New Hudson, Michigan, Yankee 47, to O'Hare Airport, which is where I flew in. And you can see that it looks like pretty much a straight line, getting from here to there. Looks pretty easy, doesn't it? By the way, that's what an aeronautical chart looks like if you're ever wondering, you know, how pilots plan these type of missions and so forth. So likewise in our organization, planning is an important part of what we do. And here we plan over the next 5 years to go from a 2% margin to a 4% margin. Again, somewhat fictitious, but not too far off. And at CHE Trinity, we set these type of planning goals, margin, operating cash flow margin, and so forth, based on where AA rated organizations are in healthcare. So we are AA rated. We plan to stay AA rated. So we set these long-term goals based on what it looks that we need to do in order to maintain that AA rating. So I wish it were as easy as just flying those straight lines. But again, in aviation, once we take that straight line, we have a whole number of environmental factors that we need to begin to adjust for. What's our altitude? What are the winds? What are the winds at different altitude? What are the temperatures? What's the magnetic deviation? We have to take all those things into account in order to determine ultimately what's the heading we need to fly in order to fly that line from here to there. I don't want to underestimate the importance of fuel and fuel burn, because you got to have fuel too, and you got to make it there, and no two flight plans are alike. There's a guy from the airport I fly from who's flown down to Kentucky year after year after year after year after year after year, done it for 20 years. Then one day he crashed, fell half a mile short of the airport because he ran out of gas. So what happened? Well, he didn't do his flight plan and didn't take into account that he had a 50-knot headwind on that particular trip, and he didn't have enough gas to get to his destination. So once you've done flight planning once, you've done it once. And the same is really true for our organization as well. Every facility, every market that we're in is different. And we have to do our planning given what the peculiars are of that particular market. And the way that we do that is we really do use these waterfall charts in each of our markets to understand what are the things that are going to help us and what are the things that are going to hurt us. And we've heard a lot about how the market is changing so dramatically, and we have more and more things that tend to be a drag, if you will, on our operating income. So we also then begin to plan around those things that are going to create lift to our operating income as well. And again, we use a lot of the tools that Dan has talked about in terms of cost accounting, decision support. We work very closely with our clinical colleagues in our clinical organization and so forth in order to begin to plan those out and also to prepare ourselves for whole different models of care as we go forward. But my worry is that in that design, we have a financial outcome in mind. We have to keep that financial outcome in mind. That's part of my job. That's what I do as the chief flight officer. So all that planning is done, but it's done on the ground. So when we get up in the air, it could be that we have a forecast for an absolutely clear day and we don't have to worry about weather, but we get up in the air and lo and behold, coming into Chicago, I have all that green and yellow stuff. Those are storms. That's bad weather, okay? So I have to continue to make adjustments for that. So I can go up, I can go down, I can turn right, I can turn left, I can turn around. I have a number of choices as the chief pilot, as the pilot in command, that I need to make. Likewise, as the CFO, I'm doing the same thing because we continue to have different variables that are thrown at us that may be different than what we had in our forecast. So we're continually having to update our forecasts and make adjustments. The 2 midnight rule, that just came out. Where'd that come from? How about the federal debt limit and the federal budget deficits? Likely going to have another round of sequestration cuts. So we know that we're constantly making these adjustments. And so we need to plan, and then we need to plan again. And when we're in flight, we need to continue to plan. But we also need to, lesson number 4, plan for surprises. So many of you may remember US Air Flight 1549 out of LaGuardia. Beautiful day, 4,000 pounds of thrust, 1,500 pounds of weight. Beautiful day. The pilots are talking back and forth about how gorgeous the Hudson is, traveling 3.83 miles a second. And all of a sudden, boom, Canadian geese. So unexpectedly, in this gorgeous day, this plane at 3,000 feet lost both engines. 150,000 pounds of weight and 0 thrust. Wow. So what do? So immediately Captain Sullenberger took control of the airplane, and he did what we teach people to do, which is make immediate decisions about airspeed, best place to land, checklists, aviate, navigate, and communicate, and he executed what ended up being a perfect landing into the Hudson without any injuries. He had about 90 seconds to make all the decisions that he made. So it came fast, and as pilot in command, he took over, took charge, and made those decisions. So in CHE Trinity Health, our bird strike came about a year ago when we were dealt with an unprecedented public crisis. We had a situation where steroids had been used by a number of private clinics around the area for pain management in back and joints for patients. And the steroid that they bought was tainted with fungal meningitis. The New England Compound Center, which is now defunct, had produced this way out of compliance without any quality control. And suddenly all these patients were injected with this bad steroid, and they came to us very, very, very ill. So this was an unprecedented health crisis for us. In St. Joe, Ann Arbor, where it was the epicenter in the state of Michigan for these patients, the CDC basically referred everyone to St. Joe's and Ann Arbor because we had been the first to respond, and we had created a whole process in terms of how we were going to clinically manage these patients. And we took on this responsibility. But for me, it was the equivalent of losing thrust, because this was my jumbo jet. A lot of lift and thrust of the organization, this is over 10% of the revenue and bottom line, was coming from this one facility. And we got jammed with these patients, and everything came to a standstill. So we partnered with our clinical colleagues and our operating colleagues to create ways to respond to it, but we also had to create a finance response team. And so like Sully Sullenberger, I took over as pilot in command for the revenue center because I knew that without the ability to manage information, to get all the information in one place, make decisions, and control the messaging with the payers, we were going to end up in a really, really, really bad place relative to our revenue management, our operating performance, and so forth. And let me tell you, I make my numbers. I always make my numbers, no matter what the crisis or contingency is. So there I am. I don't know if you guys remember Apollo 13 or not. Mission control, Gene Kranz, white vest. You know, failure is not an option. That was me. And guess what? We managed the crisis. We managed with each one of our payers, point of contact, no denials on readmissions. Everything got paid. We got paid bonuses from certain payers because they recognized the outstanding job we did managing these patients. And at the end of the day, we managed through the crisis and we made our numbers. So lesson number 4, be ready for contingencies and crises and manage them well. And then finally, that's me. Love that squeaky sound when those wheels touch. It's all about a safe landing. And what we're all about doing is planning the organization for safe landings. So for us at CHE Trinity, what that meant was a AA rating. And 2 weeks ago, Fitch and Moody's both affirmed our AA rating as a new combined CHE Trinity organization. So we took Trinity, which was AA, CHE, which was A+, combined them together, and ended up with a AA rated outcome, which we view as success. And the financial highlights that we like to brag about is the consistency of performance that we have around our operating margin, our operating cash flow margin, our liquidity factors, and our cash on hand. We have almost $7 billion cash on hand. Boggles my mind, but it's a number that I'm proud of. And you know, as we look at a lot of the turbulence and change in healthcare, we feel that we're very well prepared to make the right investments and to be able to continue to be successful in that environment. So my takeaways for you to be the CFO, to slide into the left seat of the cockpit of your organization is know what creates lift and thrust, plan 3 years ahead with measurable outcomes, know, monitor, and manage your critical points, develop contingency plans, prepare and manage surprises, stay calm, lead, and communicate, and achieve your goals. Happy journeys, and thank you.